All right, we're back again. Last afternoon. Yet again, we have Professor Christian Miller continuing on his talk on virtues, and in this case on honesty. And I again want to mention his latest book, Honesty, the Philosophy and Psychology of a Neglected Virtue. So be sure to get one if you're interested, and I've been reading it on the bus, and it's very good so far. But I haven't gotten very far, so who knows what's at the end.
It goes way downhill.
Yeah, that's right. It begins well, and then boom.
Yeah, just to draw people in, get people to buy the book. And
and then it's too late.
Yeah.
Okay, so, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's good to be back. I can't believe that some of you are back again for part two. It always amazes me that people would want to hear what I have to say twice. So thank you for coming back. And everyone have the handout? Looks like it. Yes, good. Okay. So this is recent research. What we did yesterday was some older work that was encapsulated in that book, The Character Gap, which came out 5 years ago now. And after that book came out, I kind of got a little tired of talking about that stuff, and so I wanted to do something different. And I didn't want to switch gears completely, so I wanted still to work on character, but it's just a new angle. And I was looking around and said, what is underexplored? What are people not paying attention to? What are some fresh topics about character? And it quickly became apparent that certain virtues were not getting any attention, or very little attention. In philosophy in particular, but also in theology and psychology and other fields. Generosity was one of them. So if anyone's looking for a project to work on, generosity is almost completely underexplored. Patience is another one, vastly underexplored. And honesty is the third. And we need handouts here. So for these two, you just came in. You're the handout person. So I said, wow, honesty is extremely important, and yet in the last 50 years, there are only 2 articles written on the virtue of honesty in philosophy. So it's vastly important, but also vastly underexplored. So that's what I got interested in, and for the last few years have been working pretty much primarily on this virtue of honesty, which culminated in the book that's going around somewhere that came out last summer. So what I want to do today is go over a couple themes here. Why is important? That's page 1. Page 2, just a little bit of an overview of my account of honesty. Page 3, the empirical side, how honest are most people? And that'll carry over to page 4. And then page 5 and 6, we'll be looking at cultivating honesty. So kind of growing in honesty. This will have some connection to yesterday when we were talking about cultivating virtue. And Christian themes came up yesterday. They'll come up again today at the end here, and we'll see if we get all the way to the end of the handout. We did yesterday. We got to the end of the handout yesterday. We'll see if we get that far today. Maybe yes, maybe no. All right, sound good? We ready? All righty. So why is it important? Well, maybe I don't need to say anything about that. Maybe it's just obvious why honesty is important, but let me motivate it a little bit. I think starting off, we're inspired by exemplars of honesty. In the U.S., one of the famous exemplars is Abraham Lincoln, and he's our kind of Honest Abe is his nickname, and he inspires many people to be honest. By acting honestly, we show respect for others, treat them as persons with dignity, and demonstrate that we value their autonomy. So those are powerful reasons why it's important. It promotes trust and credibility and prevents harm. It fosters healthy relationships and strengthens organizations and societies. So it turns out, I think there's very little controversy that honesty is a virtue. Other character traits, you can debate whether they're virtues or not. Some people go back and forth about humility, for example, but not honesty. It's important to cultivate in society in general, and it should be part of a good moral education. So it's pretty safe ground there. Another interesting, I think, reason to care about it emerges from some empirical work that was done by the team I work with at Wake Forest. These are empirical researchers in psychology, and they published this paper a couple years ago now, looking at what we care about in other people. And you see 3 categories. I'm sorry, it's very small here, so it's do our best. What do we like the most, respect the most, and want to know the most about other people? And they gave participants a whole bunch of choices here, different character traits they could have cited as the most important. Things like compassionate, kind, forgiving, funny, intelligent, articulate, educated. And look what happened in all 3 cases. For liking, for respecting, and for knowing, honesty was at the top. This was surprising to me. I didn't expect this to turn out that way, and yet there it is. So you check out that paper. I highly recommend it if you want to get more of the details. And finally, it gets a lot of attention when it goes missing. This is a little bit more of a, just for fun to mention this, but who knows who's in the picture on the left-hand side? Who's out on the left-hand side? Maybe not as well known over here. Bernie Madoff, that name ring a bell? Yeah. He had a big Ponzi scheme. He had a big financial fraudulent scheme that he ran for many years, cheating people out of millions of dollars. Again, sorry for the size. How about in the middle? Anyone know what that was about?
Some fraudulently got their children into it.
Exactly right. Very good. So that was an example of educational dishonesty by kind of bending the rules to get their children into top schools. And then on the right, everyone knows who that is, right? Anyone not know? Maybe I should. Well, yeah. Come on. Yeah, I should have. That's a safe one, all right? Tiger Woods, with the eyes closed because of his dishonesty. That was marital dishonesty. Huge scandal there. So, what's the point? Well, it gets a lot of attention when it goes missing. So, every day in the news, there's some story about not honesty, but lack of honesty. And it seems to grab our attention. We care a lot about it. We find it very interesting. It fuels a lot of gossip and media content. So it seems like it's a big deal, not only when it's present, but also when it's absent. But all different reasons for why I think it's important to study the honesty and dishonesty. And I'm ready to move on and actually do something about studying it. So on page 2, here we go. Sure. Let's try to define our terms a little bit here. I'm a philosopher. As you know, I always have to start conceptually by being clear what we're talking about, or I feel like I'm just lost at sea. I kind of don't know what I'm doing anymore, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's where I start, and then we get into some empirical stuff later. In the book, I spend the entire first half of the book trying to define honesty. I'm not going to do that today, but I'll give you at least a little bit of an overview of some of the views I have. So let's start with a methodological assumption. Before developing strategies for cultivating a particular virtue, it is important to first develop a good conceptual understanding of what that virtue is or involves. So I think there's a kind of logic to follow here. If we're thinking ultimately about trying to become better virtuously, we better first know what we're talking about when it comes to a particular virtue, in this case, honesty. It's hard to know how to grow in honesty unless you have some understanding of what honesty is in the first place. And here my focus is not on actions which we describe as honest, like I tell you the truth, or I cheat on the test. That's not honest. So I don't cheat on the test. That would be honest. That's not my main focus, not on particular actions. My main focus is not on momentary thoughts, which we describe as honest. My focus is on the virtue of honesty understood as a character trait. So this links back to yesterday, and we had talked about how virtues have different components to them and different sides to them. Their character traits or dispositions in one's psychology. They pertain to thinking, they pertain to feeling, they pertain to action. They're stable over time. They're consistent across situations. All that is going to be true of honesty as well. And that's what I'm going to focus on, honesty as a virtue virtuous character trait. Now, for the rest of this page, I just want to look at two sides of this trait. The behavioral side and the motivational side of the trait. So there's a lot more to look at. Again, I try to do a lot more of that in the book, but just to give you a little bit of a taste, on the behavioral side, honesty has to do with many forms of human behavior. This is one of the things that I was struck by when I started getting into the topic, is how broad scope honesty is, how much ground it covers in morality, much more so than many other moral virtues do. So it pertains to lying, of course. If I asked audiences, what do you think the main thing is that honesty prevents? They always say lying. That's where we always go first. But it doesn't stop there. Cheating, stealing, promise breaking, hypocrisy, self-deception, BSing, misleading, and even more than that. So it covers lots of ground, lots of territory. And then I had this question after I realized how broad in scope it was. I thought, well, okay, what is it at its core? If it's so diverse, what do all these things have to do with honesty? And a proposal I came up with is what's on the handout. Someone who is honest has a character which does not intentionally distort the facts as he or she sees them. So I'll say something about that and unpack that a little bit more. But it's a character which does not intentionally, so on purpose, distort or misrepresent the facts as he or she sees them. So you ask me, where did you get your PhD? And I tell you, I got my PhD at the University of Michigan. Well, that's not what I really believed. I really believe I got my PhD at Notre Dame, where in fact I did get my PhD. But in telling you I got my PhD at the University of Michigan, and what am I doing? I'm intentionally distorting the facts as I see them in telling you that I got my PhD at Michigan, and so I'm failing to be honest. If I told you I got my PhD at Notre Dame, then I'm not intentionally distorting the facts as I see them. I'm accurately representing to you the facts as I see them. I'm being honest. Okay. It's as I see them, the facts as I see them. So honesty, in my view, does not necessarily track the truth. So you can, in other words, be honest and be seriously mistaken at the same time. So 5,000 years ago, when people thought, or at least many people thought, the earth was flat, and they were discussing that, they were being honest but wrong. If it turns out that yesterday I was fired from my job at Wake Forest, and I don't know that, and you ask me today, where do you teach? And I say Wake Forest, I'm giving you an honest answer. Turns out to be wrong. Hopefully not the case, but I have no idea. But I had no idea that I was fired yesterday. But it's an imaginary story here, of course. And I would still be honest, even though I'm mistaken. So honesty doesn't track the truth. At least the objective truth. It tracks the subjective truth. How you think about the world, not how the world actually is. Okay. There's a lot more to say here, but we're going to keep going. Switch to motivation now for a minute. As we also talked about yesterday, I think virtue is not just a matter of outward behavior. Your underlying motivation, why you do the action matters too. Where is your heart? In the case of honesty, I think it's pretty interesting how motivation works. I'm going to exclude all self-interested motivation. So, why didn't you, let's take the example, why didn't you cheat on the test when you could have gotten away with it? Well, I didn't want to get caught. That would not count as virtuous motivation. I didn't want to get punished by God for cheating. Self-interested doesn't count. I didn't want to feel guilty afterwards for cheating on the test. Self-interested doesn't count. So, variety of answers you could give for why you didn't cheat on the test, and I think all those are self-interested and they don't get to count as virtuous motivation, even though the action is good. On the other hand, there are different answers you could give which would count as virtuous motivation for honesty. And there are lots of different ones. You can give loving answers, you can give justice ones, friendship ones, dutiful ones, and even honesty ones. So, why didn't you cheat on the test? Because I care about the professor. Or I care about my school. It would be unfair. It would be wrong. If I'm sounding like Kant, it would violate the moral law. No one ever says that kind of thing, but other than Kant. But you know, I would include that. Or it would, last one, it would just be dishonest. Now, those are all different answers I could have given, and any of those in my mind would count as just fine for the virtue of honesty. There's no one motivation I think that works here. I'm pluralist. I think there's lots of motivations that are fine. I don't think you can collapse them down to one. Let them all in the door. But don't open the door too far to self-interest, then you've gone too far. The door is wide open then. There's nothing left to exclude. So you open the door up quite a bit to lots of motives, but you don't open it up all the way because you still exclude self-interest as a motivation. Okay, does that make sense? Not whether you agree with it or not, but does that make sense? What's being claimed? And we can run through other examples too. You can think about a lying case instead of a cheating case, or a stealing case, and different answers that could be given and whether you think they're virtuous motives or not, but I'm going to keep going. So to sum it up, the view so far is the virtue of honesty is centrally and reliably a character trait, concern for good or virtuous motivating reasons with not intentionally distorting the facts as the agent sees them. Now, this is not the final view. It goes through 15 more modifications. This is like, philosophy gone way overboard. So it goes through 15 more modifications, but I'm not going to do any more of that today. You can ask me if you like what some additional changes you might make, or what some more needs to be added, but that's going to be all for the moment. Okay. So turn over, page 3. Here's the next methodological assumption. Before developing strategies for cultivating a particular virtue, it's important to develop a good empirical understanding of how well people are currently doing in meeting the standards of that virtue, and what the leading psychological obstacles tend to be. So again, this is ultimately going to take us to cultivating honesty, developing honesty, but it would be nice to know something about how are we doing to begin with. Are most people already honest, for example? Are most people rampantly dishonest, or somewhere in between? And then, if they're not honest, what are some of the obstacles so we can work to overcome the obstacles and get better? So some different ways of answering this question of how honest are most people. Most people have this on the handout, have the virtue of honesty. Most people have the vice of dishonesty. Most people occupy a middle space between honesty and dishonesty. Let me stop for a minute. If I only gave you those 3 options, I'm forcing you to choose between just those 3. Which one would you take? How many people go with the first one? Most people have the virtue of honesty. How many people go for most people have the vice of dishonesty? How many people go for the third one? Most people have the occupy a middle space between honesty and dishonesty. Okay. I'm not going to say what I think yet, but I did say something about that yesterday, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. but not specifically about honesty, so we'll see what happens here. There are other options, though. These are not the only ones, of course. You could say people are roughly equally split between having the virtue of honesty and having the vice of dishonesty. You could say 50% one, 50% the other. Of course, it's not that neat, but roughly, or split roughly between the three options here: honesty, dishonesty in the middle space. And there are other ones we get to cook up too. It's important to be upfront here that we're not going to be able to get any definite answers, I don't think, on this question. For one thing, there's limitations. The data almost all involve Western populations, and Western as in America and Europe overwhelmingly. There are almost no longitudinal studies here, which is unfortunate because longitudinal studies would be very helpful for character in general and for honesty in particular. So almost all the studies are one shot, bring people into a lab or do something online, one time, see how they behave or how they respond online, and then never see those people again. Having said that, I'll give you a quick overview of some of the studies. There are many, many more, but this is not the main focus for this talk. So just a quick survey of a couple. And on the bottom, I'll also bring in some specifically having to do with in-group bias, which is certainly relevant to what we're doing here. So an old one from 1976, participants were told to stop taking tests on their own after 5 minutes. When a bell went off, 71% kept going after 5 minutes in the control condition. So it looks like they disobeyed what they were told to do and in some sense cheated, or in some sense dishonest here. 7% kept going in the experimental condition when seated in front of a mirror. What? Some of you probably heard this kind of results before, but if the first time you're seeing that, you probably think, what in the world? That is weird. And I think you're right to react that way. That is weird. Come back to that. More recent, 2013, participants flipped a coin on their own, and we paid $1 for each self-reported heads. So there's an incentive, financial incentive to get heads, or at least to report that you got heads, whether you got heads or not. 6.22 heads were reported on average out of 10 flips in the control condition, where participants were warned to not cheat. So it looks like there is some cheating going on, but not dramatic. 5.23 heads in the experimental condition, where participants were warned to not be cheaters. That's the only difference in the warning. Not cheat versus not be cheaters. Why would that matter? 2011, one of my favorite kinds of studies in this literature. This is involving the shredder and the test. So a 20 problem test, paid 50 cents per correct answer. About 8 problems solved in the control condition where participants had no opportunity to cheat, but 13 problems, quote unquote, solved in a shredder condition where participants could shred their answer sheets and report whatever number of correct answers they liked without worrying about getting caught. Now, looks like a big difference there. So it looks like some evidence of cheating. I mean, either it could be that they're just so much smarter, they just did so much better on the test, so we don't know for sure that it's cheating, but it's the obvious and most likely explanation that they're inflating their performance. But it's also not to the max either. So, question, why wouldn't they say 20? Or why wouldn't many of them say 20? If they're willing to cheat in the first place, they want the money, why not go all the way and get more money? 2008, building on this setup, 3.4 problems solved in the control condition. This is clearly different problems. Performances, only 3 out of 20 here. And 6.1 in the shredder. But the interesting is the third condition, a new one, where student participants had first signed an honor code or an ethics code before they started working on the test. And there is 3.1 problems. So it drops back down to the control level. Why would that be? If people were willing to cheat, why would they care about signing an honor code? I mean, Why would they just sign the honor code and then turn around and cheat and get paid more? But they didn't. 2010, same setup as before. Shredder once again, but with 2 shredder conditions involving wearing sunglasses. Anyone got? Probably don't wear sunglasses too much, especially around here in the wintertime. Maybe in the summertime, but in the condition where participants wore what they were told were authentic sunglasses, 30% cheated. But for the groups told they were wearing counterfeit sunglasses, 71% cheated. What the heck? Sorry. Being recorded here. Yeah, right. So, in the back of your mind, try to come up with some explanations for these results. What would explain why the mirror makes a difference? What would explain why the change in the instructions makes a difference? Warn to not cheat versus not be cheaters, etc. So, the honor code. I'll briefly mention 2 other studies, specifically having to do with in-group bias, and I'll stop going through this. Sometimes the more studies, it gets more tedious and it's easy to zone out. The more empirical data is thrown at people. So just 2 more. The pull-free one. Here, what they did was paired up people. And they had 2 kinds of pairings. Pairings of people who knew each other and pairings of people who didn't know each other. And then they had the pairs, the dyads, do this task. And the task involved tracing a picture. And the trick with this was not just tracing a picture, but they had to reproduce a picture that they were shown and reproduce it without lifting up their pencil. And there were 6 of these figures that they were shown. Turns out that it was impossible to do this for 3 of them. 3 of the 6 figures, it was impossible to reproduce it without lifting up your pencil, but they were never told that. And you couldn't really distinguish which ones were possible, which ones were impossible. But you would know if you were the experimenter that if people said they got more than 3, something funny was going on. So what happened? Well, the relevance here is in-group, out-group. So for the pairings where people knew each other already, 25% cheated. For the pairings where they didn't know each other, they were strangers, only 4.7, I think it was. So 4.7% cheated, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think that's right, yeah. So 25% versus basically 5%. So greater willingness to cheat in the context of an in-group situation versus an out-group situation where the in-group, out-group was based upon whether you knew the other person or not, and whether you had a relationship with the other person or not. The Cadsbury et al. 2016 was a little bit more involved. Just to hit the main highlights here, this was a study done in China using the die roll setup, where you would be given a die and told to roll it secretly without anyone else seeing what you got, and then you could just verbally report what you got in the die roll. And the die rolls were tied to how money would be allocated. So in one of the variations here, the die rolls would be tied to how money would be allocated to an in-group versus an out-group. So if it was a die roll of a 1, then money would go heavily to the in-group and not to the out-group. If it was a 2, it'd go primarily to the in-group, but some to the out-group. If it was a 3, it would go roughly half and half. If it was a 4, it would go, flip it around. More to the out-group than the in-group. If it was a 5, it would go mostly to the out-group and very little to the in-group. And so what they found here was that there's what chance would predict. So the allocation that chance would predict, if we were just rolling the die and accurately reporting what we got on the die rolls. And then there's the allocation that people actually said, based upon the die rolls they claim they had. And the die rolls they claim they got were much more in favor of the in-group as opposed to the out-group. So skewed the allocation in favor of the in-group as opposed to the out-group. So an example of dishonest behavior here, but for the sake of benefiting the in-group. Okay. All right, turn the page. I think we've done enough studies. Here are some more general observations and then an explanation. Across many studies, the majority of participants will often engage in cheating behavior when they think they can get away with it, and there is some non-trivial reward associated with cheating. So, and that's a pattern that you see in all these studies here, showing up again and again. They're often engaged in cheating behavior when they think they can get away with it. That's important. It makes sense. And there's some non-trivial reward associated with cheating, which also makes sense. But at the same time, when participants do cheat in the behavioral task, it is usually to a moderate degree and almost never the full amount they were able to. So why didn't they go for 20 out of 20 on the problems? Right? Why in the allocation of the task I just described there, didn't they always go for the greatest allocation to the in-group? In the coin flipping one, why is it 6.22 heads on average out of 10? Why not just say 10 out of 10 and get paid more? So there's an interesting tension in some ways. A willingness to cheat, but not to the maximum extent. Is that clear? Wow. Why? What explains that? Well, we don't know for sure, but we're just doing, positing different psychological explanations and then seeing what predictions they make and whether the predictions are in line with the evidence. And as far as I can tell, the leading psychological explanation out there, which doesn't mean it's necessarily the best one, it's just the most popular one at the moment, is something like the following. Most people generally believe that cheating is morally wrong, at least in most cases. So that's kind of thumbs up. That's, from a moral perspective, that's a good thing. I'm glad that that's the case as opposed to the opposite. Number two, what we've already gestured at, most people at the same time want to cheat if by doing so they can benefit themselves in some way by their own lives to make the cheating seem worthwhile and if they think they can get away with it without not get caught. So that's a kind of thumbs down, morally speaking. Hard to see how that's in line with honesty. So we got thumbs up and thumbs down. Now those two together though don't seem to account for the patterns of results we've seen. So we need to add a little bit more. Most people want others to think of themselves as honest people. So I care about how you think of me and my character. That matters. And it's this fourth one that's going to do a lot of work. Most people want to think of themselves as honest people. So it's not what I caring about what you think of me, it's what I caring about what I think of myself. I want to think of myself as a good person in general, and in this case specifically as an honest person. And so we go back to some of these results, and the thought is, well, look, if you sign the honor code, it's hard to then turn right around and cheat and still think of yourself as a good person. The mirror serves as a moral reminder of your values, and it's hard to look yourself in the mirror and turn around and cheat and still think of yourself as a good person. The instructions in the Bryan study, participants were warned not to be cheaters. Bring to conscious attention that label of cheater. Don't want to be labeled that way. I don't want to think of myself as a cheater, so that's going to block temptation to overinflate how you did with the coin flips. So that's at least a sketch of what I think is the leading story here. And if that's right, then I think the emerging picture is something like in that diagram. This is something you saw yesterday too, but now playing out specifically in the context of one virtue, honesty. On the one hand, we're not seeing evidence of honesty when it comes to number 2 in the explanation. On the other hand, we're not seeing not evidence, but this doesn't fit the story about dishonesty when it comes to number 1 in the explanation. On the one hand, in the data, a lot of behavior doesn't seem to fit the pattern of honesty. When we see this cheating in the Schroeder condition, for example. But on the other hand, a lot of the behavior doesn't fit the pattern of dishonesty either. When there's no cheating in the honor code condition. So I think how many people raised their hands for the middle position earlier? I was secretly on your side. I just didn't want to tell you yet, but I'm with you. I think that's the right way to go here. That's my view as well. Okay. Right. Still got time. Now let's get to where I said we're going to go, and that's cultivating. So here's the methodological implication now. Given a good understanding, or at least the beginnings of a good understanding of what the virtue of honesty involves, and given a good empirical understanding, or at least the beginnings of a good empirical understanding of how we are doing in this area of our moral lives, and the ways in which we fall short of being honest people, we can then be well positioned to try to devise strategies which are specifically tailored to cultivating the virtue of honesty. So rather than talking in general terms about becoming better people or growing in virtue, we can focus specifically on this one virtue and some of the obstacles to this one virtue, and try and address those obstacles and become more honest. Okay, so next page. What happens here is we're going to target number 1, which is most people generally believe that cheating is morally wrong, at least in most cases. And then on the bottom of the page, going to target number 2. And then say something about that. Target number 4. And then if there's time at the end, talk a little bit about whether there's any empirical evidence that this stuff might work. Okay. So targeting number 1 again, which is most people genuinely believe that cheating is morally wrong, at least in most cases. That seems like a thumbs up. Good that that's the case. Let's encourage it, strengthen it, and increase the salience of our moral beliefs about cheating. Make them more applicable. Come to bear more often. How might we do that? Well, 2 things are highlighted here: sustained moral reminders and role models. I said yesterday I would get to this, and now I'm getting to it today. I didn't talk about it yesterday, but now I'm coming back to it today. So, moral reminders. Use regular moral reminders that serve to make our moral commitments salient, and thereby work against our solely pursuing our own self-interest. With frequent or repeated moral reminders, one's moral beliefs could become increasingly habituated into being salient. So what might that look like more practically? That's very abstract, I know, and what might that look like very concretely? Well, the honor code is one we've already seen. You don't have anything like an honor code here, right?
We have no honor.
I say that. I say honor. I said honor code. So no, I at the university, no, we don't. You don't do that anywhere in Finland. No. Okay, that's what my experience is that it rarely varies. Culture to culture.
A vow for judges or what is that? Is that?
Yeah, but it's different from honor codes are in American universities. Okay.
There are explicit and written out honor codes that apparently
Yeah. So just a little bit more context. That's what I expected the reaction to be, and so in the U.S. they're much more common. in my university, before anyone takes a test, they have to read a statement about the importance of honesty and not cheating and so forth, and then they have to sign their name to the statement. And then they take the test. So they're pledging their honor. They're committing themselves. They're making a kind of promise that they're not going to cheat in the test they're going to take next. This has been studied for a while, and it's been found to be quite effective, not in eliminating cheating, but in reducing cheating in comparison to comparing universities which have an honor code to universities which don't have an honor code. There's remarkable differences. So, and then we already saw in the behavioral study here from Mazur, 2008, experimentally might make a difference too. But what the idea is that these codes of ethics ultimately are serving as moral reminders and reminding us of our values which we hold all along, but maybe are not at the forefront of our minds, in our conscious awareness. And so it brings them to the forefront of our minds, and then makes it harder for people to then turn around and go against them, to cheat. But there could be all kinds of other moral reminders, daily readings with rich ethical content, diaries. These are all secular examples here. Doesn't matter what religious views you have. These can serve as moral reminders as well. So some people have the diary about their successes and their failures, and they kind of record those every day. Serves as a reminder to them of how their day went and a way to tasking themselves to do better the next day. I also want to bring in this context, since we've been very interdisciplinary, talking about ethics, empirical research, and theology, come back to some Christian examples as well of sustained moral reminders. I don't think I'm going to read all this, but just to hit the highlights here: regularly reading religious texts, role modeling, small groups, structured gatherings in which Christians might participate, prayer, and confession, all are rich with moral reminders, including reminders of honesty. So there's a sense in which embedded into much of the Christian life, practically speaking, are moral reminders which are supposed to, amongst other things, keep our priorities straight, keep our focus where it's supposed to be. The other point here is about role models. These are people who we can admire for their good character. When we admire them, we'd also want to be like them, to emulate them. We get inspired to be more like them, not in every way, but in the ways that count for developing a good moral character. Any role models of honesty come to mind? Yeah.
In the Bible.
I didn't qualify.
I was thinking about King David, actually, because he talks so much about honesty, or I don't know what, like sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does, from what we know about his life, he does exemplify those virtues.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one. Yeah.
Couple of imaginary role models, maybe Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
He can't tell a lie. He's teaching. And Forrest Gump.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Opposite ends of IQ spectrum.
Right. Very good. Yeah. How many of you seen Forrest Gump? Oh, lots of you. Yeah. Okay.
Everyone's seen it. So.
Okay. No, I'm checking. The honor code that was a complete blank, but Forrest Gump's a thumbs up. Okay.
So Maverick, how about Maverick, Aku?
He is quite honest, to be honest. So
Yeah.
he doesn't pretend to be anything else than he is. He doesn't mislead people.
Okay, so Abraham Lincoln's the big one in the U.S., of course. For
You actually might have to tell the story a little bit further,
Ah.
because not that many people know about
Yeah,
it
so-
in this context.
Yeah, so sorry, I sometimes assume things. So his nickname is Honest Abe, and even from an early age, he was renowned for sacrificing his own self-interests for the sake of the truth and for the sake of honesty. So one famous example, he was a store clerk, and a customer came in and overpaid by like a few cents. And he discovered afterwards that the customer had overpaid, and so he, when his time to close the shop, he went a long distance to track down the customer and return those few cents to the customer, to make sure that the customer was given the correct amount of change, or something along those lines. So one of many examples. In a court case, he refused to defend someone when he learned that, in fact, the person was guilty. He refused. He thought it was be dishonest of him to defend this person. So, yeah, that's. If you asked, I think, Americans who in American history is the most honest, he would be the example. All right. That's all with respect to number one. I think I got about 5-10 minutes. All right.
Sure.
Number two, most people want to cheat if by doing so they can benefit themselves in some way, blah, 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 blah. This is the cheating desire. Here, it's not a matter of strengthening. Here you want to weaken. Number one, you want to strengthen. You want to make more robust that belief about the wrongness of cheating. Here you want to weaken this desire to cheat. Two strategies emerge, although I'm not going to develop them very much, but just in kind of hand-waving terms. One is punishment, and the other is fostering love and compassion. So how can you try and get people to want to cheat less? By increasing the costs associated with getting caught cheating. So increasing the level of punishments that's given to people for cheating can weaken their desire to cheat because they don't want to get punished if they get caught. And then in a Christian context, this is especially effective perhaps because there's no such thing as getting away with it in a Christian context. You might think, oh, I can get away with it and not get caught in a secular context. I can fool the humans, but you're not going to be able to fool God, an omniscient God here. So who's going to know whether you do it or not, and might dole out punishments accordingly. So, but this, as you already are thinking probably, is of value, but maybe of limited value for developing a virtue, because the motivation is self-interested. So I wouldn't cheat in this kind of context, this way of thinking, because I don't get punished by humans, or I don't want to get punished by God. But that's punishment avoidance, that's self-interested, that's not virtuous motivation. So to work this out further, I think we'd have to talk about how we could try to move beyond making this purely a matter of self-interested motivation and somehow get it to turn into or evolve into virtuous motivation. Alternatively, here, in terms of weakening this desire, you can encourage the fostering of love and compassion. The thought here is that if we're talking about genuine love and compassion, that's selfless, other-directed, concerned with what's good for the other person. And you might think that's going to be incompatible with the desire to cheat the other person. So, to the extent to which I want to cheat or lie to my children, parents, or wife without good reason, I thereby do not love them as much as I could. So if you can foster love and compassion towards a certain group of people, you may be able to correspondingly weaken the desire to cheat those people. And here, how might you do that? Well, that's a talk for another time. That's not this talk. We have to look for secular or Christian resources for fostering love of neighbor. And then the last one, this is going back to number 4 now, targeting 4. Unfortunately, I wrote down the wrong one. So I have targeting 4, which is correct. I just didn't type out number 4. So if you go back, 4 is most people want to think of themselves as, whoops, sorry. I just said the wrong thing. about the mistake that's made on the handout. Let's start that all over again. How about this? What I meant to have on the handout, I did write down number 4. What I meant to have on the handout is number 3. That's what I meant to have. Most people want others to think of themselves as honest people. That's what I wanted to look at. The danger of wanting to maintain that good reputation is that you might cut corners to maintain that good reputation. So there's a danger of acting dishonestly to preserve an honest reputation. There's also danger of moral licensing. So after having done something morally admirable, I might say, okay, now I get a break. I can take a break now and do something disadmirable because I've already got a lot of credits stored up for having done a good thing. So here I think we want to be a little concerned too. What can we do about this? And then the rest of the text is accurate. It's just I should have put down 3 instead of 4. So Christians naturally should want to be thought of as honest, but first and foremost by God. So it doesn't matter as much what other humans think of me. It matters ultimately what God thinks of me. That's the opinion of another that matters the most. And in that case, Christians should be concerned that God thinks of them as honest, really honest. Not just having a reputation for honesty, but really being an honest person, only if they actually have become honest people. So the observant Christian wouldn't take immoral steps in an effort to preserve her reputation of being honest in God's eyes, nor would she allow God's acknowledgement of her honesty to serve as an opportunity to license cheating. So to sum this up, really the big ones for me are number 1 and number 2, trying to strengthen 1 and weaken 2. Number 3 can come into this as well, but as I think a secondary matter. And then in the 3 remaining minutes I see here, let me run through this last section. Does Christianity actually make a difference to cultivating honesty? So this kind of ties back to yesterday as well. Is there any empirical evidence to say this makes a difference, to back it up? And you probably know what I'm going to say here. Nothing conclusive. Suggestive. Yesterday, more suggestive. Today, more, I don't know, more agnostic. Just because there's just not much out there. That's helpful. So the question is, any empirical evidence that serious Christians tend to be more honest on average than a relevant secular group? If so, is this due to their Christian commitments and not to some third variable, such as a personality trait, which also is higher in Christians than in non-religious individuals? And again, to steal the show here, I don't know. The evidence is not very conclusive one way or the other. There are a number of studies about self-reported cheating. And this is perspective, so whether you're likely to cheat or not. And I don't put a lot of stock in that. People reporting whether they're likely to cheat or not. You can say all you want about whether you're likely to cheat or not, and then when the situation arises, do something rather different. But to give you an example, one of these studies, 1991, Oklahoma City participants. Frequency of attending a place of worship was a self-reported measure of religiosity. The cheating measure was a yes or no question on whether you would cheat on your income taxes in the future. And church attendance had a significant inverse effect on intention to commit the offense. In other words, people who said they attended church a lot also said they were unlikely to cheat on their income taxes in the future. Do you believe them? I don't know. Hold that thought. Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I want to know whether they actually cheated on their income taxes, not whether they intended to. I mean, it's nice if they intended not to, but if they in fact cheated on their income taxes, that's kind of negates the value of their intentions. All right, so what is more interesting to me are observed cheating behavior studies. And on the handout on the last page, there are 4 listed. I'm just going to summarize one of them to give you a feel of, okay, here's how one of these studies is run, but why it's not the most illuminative for my purposes. So from 2017, participants worked on unscrambling 9 jumbled words. They would receive 10 cents for each correct answer. And at the end of 5 minutes, they would report the number they had solved. The trick was that they were told to complete the problems in sequential order, but unbeknownst to them, the 3rd problem was unsolvable. So if they reported anything higher than 2 correct answers, they cheated, or they were really bad at following instructions. So 3.82 was the mean number of jumbles solved. So that at least the average suggests some cheating, although 50% did not cheat at all. But in this study, what they were looking at was just participants who are Christians, no control group, no secular control group. And they were, for example, looking at were the differences between Catholics and Protestants. So that doesn't really get at what I'm interested in. It's an interesting study, of course, no fault of those experimenters, but I can't make much of that for my purposes. So to conclude, are the resources provided by Christianity when embodied in the life of the practicing Christian actually effective in promoting the virtue of honesty with respect to cheating? I say we just don't know on the basis of the existing research. Maybe we have some evidence on other bases, maybe testimony, maybe your experience around Christians or whatnot, but if you want the pretty rigorous studies, you're not going to find them. And I think these are just early days in the empirical study of this topic, which goes along with the idea that these are early days in the study of honesty in general. As I said, almost no one is working on the virtue of honesty at all, conceptually, theologically, empirically. So anything we're doing right now, I think is pretty preliminary. And it's, it's an exciting time in one way because there's a lot more to do and there's a lot of open terrain here that needs to be discovered and mined and explored. But we have to, at this point, I think, to be very cautious about drawing any confident conclusions and be pretty tentative about where things are. So I will stop. Thank you so much. I think there's are we doing the commentary again today?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have it, yeah.
I think it's me this time.
Oh, yeah. So, thank you, Christian, for the introduction to this interesting topic. As an introduction to my comments, a few things about Finland. So it's quite a good thing, I think, to talk about honesty in Finland, because I have some experiences of other countries, but it seems to me that Finns highly value honesty as a virtue. And this is seen in a number of ways. So a few years back, I was involved with writing, sketching this policy paper for the Finnish government. Michael was also involved in the process, like many, many others. So, and the topic of that policy paper was information policy and artificial intelligence ethics. So, ethics that have to do with technology, developing safe technologies, and various other things. And part of that paper was to try to map out central values or goals, which the kind of responsible information policy and data policy would try to hold on to and try to get to. And one of the main ideas that we identified in that process was trust. So based on some of the research that has been done, Finland and Finns in general have a high level of trust, first of all between them, and also trust towards public institutions. Including the government, various government institutions, the military, so on. and quite remarkably so compared to many other countries, especially English-speaking countries. So we have very high levels of trust, and this was in that process of writing that paper was considered an extremely good thing and considered something that is worth preserving. So this idea of trust. So it seems to me that cultivating trust as a public good has very much to do with honesty and cultivating honesty in individuals. So on that note, I have a few questions, comments/questions. So first, let's start with evolutionary psychology. So trust, I think, and honesty have to do with this quite closely, because it seems to me that from an evolutionary point of view, one of the main things that we have to do as social and cultural beings is to find people that we can trust. So we want to read signals because we want to find trustworthy collaborators. We need people to collaborate with, so we're looking for different signals of a person being trustworthy, being honest, in this sense, that won't cheat, won't lie, keeps his words, things like that. And this is, I think, the reason, at least for me, that comes to mind at first as an explanation for why we value honesty so highly. Because this is crucial information for us, because we want to find collaborators, and who's a better collaborator than the one who's honest? So I think this creates a situation in which we want to look for various signals of honesty. So I wonder what you think about this. So what would be the kinds of signals, if you want to portray yourself as an honest person, what kinds of signals one would give? This is question number one. And this is probably, I mean, I would think also a reason for people not to cheat. Even if they could cheat a lot, they don't want to cheat that much, because they still want to be seen as trustworthy, want to be seen as honest people, not just by themselves, but for others. So I think it's quite important for people to signal themselves, signal honesty in many different ways. So that's number one. Second, one thing that you said had to do with this in-group, out-group distinction. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. So is there any evidence that attributions of honesty change from out-group to across in-group, out-group distinctions? Because it seems to me that it's when someone is part of the same group as us, I mean, even if it's an arbitrary group to some extent, high levels of trust, levels of trust are higher, which would then it would seem quite plausible to me from that point of view to say that we attribute honesty to the in-group rather than the out-group. And you can see this in some of this conspiracy theorizing. So you don't think the out-group being honest, and if they say, well, we have nothing against you, then you don't believe them because they have an evil plan to destroy you. And that explains very well why all these good people in my group are suffering, because these evil out-groupers are out to get us. So there's the attribution of honesty. So we attribute honesty to others rather than easier to our in-group than the out-group. Again, a kind of gut feeling, anecdotal thing. So that's number two. Then comment and question number three. In the book you have a very interesting point about lying and dishonesty. So you have this example of a student. The teacher is asking you, the teacher is asking me as a student for my homework, and I say, well, I can't produce the homework. I did write the homework, but the dog ate it. So I know the dog didn't eat my homework. I'm lying about that. But that's not the only thing that I'm doing. What I'm doing when I'm lying is I'm also deceiving the other person about what I believe. And I think this was quite an interesting point. This was an interesting thing. So I'm not just feeding false information, to the teacher, but I'm also pretending to be something that I'm not. And I'd like you to say a little bit more about that. So the connection between honesty, it's a kind of deception when you're lying. So, and you're not just deceiving about what is true, but you're also deceiving other people about what you're like. So about my own beliefs when I'm lying. So I'm giving a kind of false account of myself when I'm doing that. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And then the fourth thing, you also say that we care about whether we are honest from our own point of view. So this, of course, raises the question of self-deception. So is self-honesty, is an honest person somehow a person who's honest to oneself, not prone to self-deception? So what is the connection between self-deception and this virtue of honesty? And also, is there a similar way to develop one's kind of anti-self-deception, or kind of cultivating self-honesty? Is there such a thing as self-honesty? Because it seems to me that that would be a virtuous trait, at least. At least the people that I tend to admire are the kinds of people who don't lie to themselves. It's somehow even worse to lie to yourself than to lie to others. At least I remember when I was younger, I always thought that perhaps in some situations I might lie to other people, but if I believe my own bullshit, that's really pathetic. So that's somehow even worse. So you can lie to others, but not to yourself. And there's something degrading about lying to oneself.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether you have anything on this issue of cultivating self-honesty, and also this connection of self-deception and honesty.
Great.
So those are my 4
Yeah.
comments and questions.
Wow. Thank you. Super comments and questions, and I'm going to have a lame response, not a super response, because for some of them I just don't know, and I have to go back and do more research. So that's going to be my tip you off in advance. I'm going to give you the lame answer. So we look for signals of honesty in others. I think that's right, especially in certain contexts. What we might look for certain signals. So when I'm looking for a marriage partner, I'm looking for certain kind of signals. When I'm interacting with students, I'm looking for other kinds of signals. When I'm thinking about friends and deeper friends, good friends, I'm looking for other kinds of signals. There could be overlap in the signals, but also can be distinctions between the signals too. The kinds of signals I'm looking for in a marriage partner can be different than the kinds of signals I'm looking for in my students and their honesty. When I'm evaluating, when it comes to my students' honesty, signals having to do with, are they showing me a pattern of telling me the truth about their work? Or are I'm getting signals that they are fabricating or distorting what work they did or did not do. I'm trying to pick up on that. Or I'm looking for signals in the course of a test, signs that they have some notes hidden away. And that's going to be an actual sign that they're being less than honest. Or on the flip side, no, they're focused just on their paper, their exam, they're not looking anywhere else, they're working very diligently on the paper, which is a kind of sign that I'm picking up on that they're being honest with respect to that test right then. So I think, seems to me it's going to vary, what signals and signs we're looking for to vary based upon the type of relationship in question, who it is, and often these signs are lacks of doing something or not doing something as opposed to positively doing something. So I'm looking for absence of evidence of cheating, of lying, of stealing, as opposed to,
Yeah, so now it occurs to me what I was actually asking.
Okay.
Or what I was trying to get at, but I wasn't able to formulate it. So in many situations in human psychology, we have this thing that there are some arbitrary signals. Let's say that there is the person has an asymmetric feature or something like that, and we construe that as a moral fault. Or that somehow signals to our psychology that that person is not as trustworthy or as honest. I guess what I was also asking or wondering about whether there is evidence of this kind of phenomena happening, that we have a situation in which, for instance, a person has been injured and doesn't have a left hand, but people tend to take that person as less honest. Or something like that, I mean, signals that don't really have to do with the moral quality of the person at all, but we construe them as in attributing dishonesty, for instance. So, because this happens in other fields, it might seem to seem like a plausible hypothesis here as well, that there might be something like that. And I guess this is the reason why I asked about the in-group, out-group thing. So if you're somehow part of the out-group and there are some signals that you notice that the other person is a part of the out-group, then you tend to attribute attribute dishonesty to that person, just on the basis of the group distinction, not because of the moral qualities. So I guess that was the
Well, I think it's
behind my question.
It's pretty clear the answer to the out-group question is yes, that does happen. And I could get you, was it?
No.
Sorry. I could get you papers to that effect. That there is much more of an inclination to assign or attribute dishonesty to out-group members than there is to in-group members. That's pretty clear. And we have some evidence of that through our work and through some published work too. Yeah. I don't know about the more general question. I don't know. I have to think about that some more. So to the dog example, to just go over that again because he's referring to something in the book, and I don't know if this might also be a cultural difference. So, has everyone heard that excuse for not turning in assigned work? My dog ate it. Everyone heard that? Okay, I know because that's
it's in the Peanuts comic book. So
therefore everyone knows it.
Everyone's read that.
So. Oh, okay. I just can't assume this stuff though.
It's always in Peanuts.
Okay, Of course, no one ever uses that excuse. I've never heard of one case of that actually being used. But so suppose the student uses this as the excuse. The teacher believes it. So the teacher might form a couple of beliefs. One, that the homework was eaten by the dog. The teacher might come to believe that. And also the teacher might come to form the belief that the student believes that the homework was eaten by the dog. Those are two different beliefs. One about what happened to the homework, and the other about the psychology of the student. And from the student's perspective, the student might be trying to get the teacher to form those two beliefs. Now, maybe not intentionally, like going through the conscious process of, I want my teacher to form two beliefs, but it's part of the package of giving that excuse that the student wants the teacher to come to believe this about the homework, and also the student wants the teacher to trust the students and to believe that the student believes that this is what happened to the homework, right? And of course, it's not what happened to the homework. And a student knows that this isn't what happened to the homework. And so the student's lying in this case. So they're lying about the homework, and they're misleading, giving him misleading, in the process misleading the student, the teacher as well, about their own psychology. That's right. Yeah, that's how I understand it. Yeah. So that in some ways, two bad results ensue here, as opposed to just one is what we normally think of. Two bad results ensue. Yeah. And then the last one I'd like to say a little bit more about is the self-deception. And that's a great question. You'll get to it in the book later on. I have about 10 pages on self-deception where it's kind of just preliminary. But I want to work on this more. So my view about honesty in the book is a view about moral honesty, understood as a moral virtue. And the account I give is meant to just apply to the moral case. When we come to self-deception, that's not in the realm of the moral primarily, I don't think. It's the realm of the intellectual or the epistemic. And as a result, it's going to now take us into a different kind of virtue realm. It's going to take us into epistemic or intellectual virtues. And so what I need to then, the question that arises, is my account going to also provide a basis for the intellectual virtue of honesty as well as the moral virtue of honesty? Is it going to work over there too? And I want to say yes, it probably, I'm hoping it will, so that I can take the account, run with it as an account of intellectual honesty, and then use it to judge self-deception as a failure of intellectual honesty, but not of moral honesty. So it is related, but in the next domain over from moral virtue. So I want to say, okay, what do I want to say about it? Self-deception is it's a failure of honesty. It's intentionally distorting the facts as you see them, vis-a-vis yourself. So my account actually applies there. And it is what you also said about how it's a serious failure. I think I would also want to endorse that too. Yeah, I think I'm maybe forgetting one other side of what you asked, but the upshot is that I want to run with what I've said and apply it to self. I think there is self-honesty, which is the mirror of self-deception, and we're going to be in the epistemic realm, and my account can generalize to the epistemic realm. So, okay, let me stop. I can. Yeah. Okay.
Be the head person.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Two things quickly. First of all, I don't think it's very surprising that most people would fall between virtue and vice, like in your general program you say, because virtue by nature is something that's rare. It's like, and so is vice. It's like ability to sing. Like if we want to sing some song together, most of us can keep the rhythm and keep the melody, right? But very few of us could sing in a way that we value and would enjoy listening in our car. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the kinds
We
of
have excellence in singing.
exactly
Excellent.
there's certain excellence about virtue. So it may not be a very exciting outcome that most people fall between vice and virtue. However, I think most people don't fall between dishonesty and honesty based on your data, because it would seem to me that most people are actually dishonest, because you say across many studies the majority of participants will often engage in cheating behavior when they think they can get away with it. And also, the reason they are not going all the way is vicious. The reason is that they want to seem like honest persons to themselves and to others. And that's not virtuous. That's not a virtuous motivation to not cheat as much as you could cheat. So, what do you think about that?
Good. On the first point, I don't know if it's just a conceptual truth that virtue is going to be rare. I think it's a contingent fact whether virtue is going to be rare or not. So it still needs to be empirically investigated in a given society whether virtue is widely possessed or not. We can't a priori just assume it's going to be rare. A given society might have actually succeeded in cultivating the virtues. And so I also imagine possible worlds in which, not society, but possible worlds in which the majority of people have the virtues. So in those worlds, they wouldn't be rare. They would be the common. The commonality would be the virtues. An absence of virtues would be rare. Having said that, yes, I think I take your general point. They are achievements, and they're difficult achievements. A common analogy is used with skills. It's the skill analogy for virtue. And so all skills that we're normally acquainted with are not ones we acquire overnight or are born with. We have to work hard over a span of maybe even years to acquire them, being a chess master, being a piano musical expert, and so forth. So I take the general point. I just don't want to know if it's conceptually required that they're rare. I think it's still contingent empirical fact. And about this, look, I don't have any personal investment of how this turns out. So if it turns out that the arrow needs to go over to the right-hand side into the vice, part of the diagram as opposed to the middle, okay, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. So it could be that you're right. I would say I would be much more resistant if you're trying to make the case that it needs to go to the left-hand side to the virtue of honesty. What led me to the middle space, though, was much more than I presented here. So I'd be happy to share more. It's in the book. So I outline about 10 different requirements on dishonesty, and I suggest the evidence doesn't meet those requirements. But just to expand a teeny bit from what's on the handout, I'm still surprised that something like the Maser 2008 results would turn out this way. Why the participants who had first signed an honor code would then not turn around and cheat anymore. Because if we're really talking about the dishonesty, the way I'm thinking about it, I would expect dishonest people to sign the honor code because that's what is expected, but just treat it as a formality, go through the motions, and then turn around and cheat anyway. So they don't get caught, they did what they were supposed to do, they look like they're honest because they signed the honor code, and then get the money anyway. And yet they didn't. So that's just one small piece of evidence. Yeah.
Anthony? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to come back to the question of the self. I think it's very crucial here, but maybe it's more a question for any morality based on virtue.
Mm-hmm.
But so I was reading a book about that was raising a question of how you make a whole society dishonest. Because maybe you want, if you're in such a society where there is generalized lie or bribery, you have to make people dishonest. But nobody wants to watch herself in the mirror and say, I'm dishonest, I'm a bribe, I'm giving bribes, I'm lying, etc. So one of the solutions is to divide the self and to say, okay, my real self is the self that I am when I raise my son or something, or love my wife. And when I give a bribe to someone, I'm some kind of other self. Of course, it's some kind of me, but it's an important part of myself. And so how one can address this kind of strategy for being dishonest without facing the mirror?
So the idea here is that this person's compartmentalized their lives into a private inner self.
Yeah.
And they are honest there. They're honest with themselves, they're honest with their loved ones. And then they have a public persona, a public image. And in this context, the public image requires them to be dishonest. Maybe they have to be politicians, for example. Not your politicians, my politicians, where it seems like in America, the only way to be a politician who gets elected is to be dishonest. And then you're saying that's a bad thing, and you're trying to say, how can we get rid of that? So it's not, because you might say that's just, it's unfortunate, but it's a necessary evil. You might say, well, and it's people have to live that way in this society that you envision. But you're wondering, no, how can we move beyond that? Am I right?
Yeah.
Understanding. I'm not sure how one would move beyond that if it's true that everyone else in society is acting in the same way, corruptly, and you're going to suffer significantly if you don't as well. You can die on the sword of virtue and say, I'm going to do what's right no matter what, even if it's going to cost me a lot in my social life, because I care so much about being a good person and doing the right thing.
Yeah. But in that case, you wouldn't even feel the need the moral need to be a good person because you would consider you're a good person. But that's the trick of the, like, you're not doing anything wrong because it's not you doing it.
Okay. Well, the you is very tricky here, right? In some sense, you are still doing it because you're allowing your body to carry out these actions. You're endorsing these bodily movements, pulling out the cash and paying it to the judge. It's not like there's some other stranger who's taken over your body and is doing those things for you. Even if they don't ultimately represent your deepest values, you're still autonomously permitting your body to do these things that are not in line with your real self. Yeah.
It seems to me that this is just an ultimate form of self-deception, that you intentionally create a false self-representation and use that for self-deception purposes. This connects to what you said yesterday about the Aristotelian idea that the more virtuous the character, more well integrated the character is. So this would be an example of a disintegrated, almost disoriented character, when you would have two accounts of the self, and then you would say, no, that's not me. That's just something acting on the basis of these societal realities that necessitate this kind of behavior. That has nothing to do with my values or my core beliefs or my core emotions. So I'm not really like that at all. So it's an extreme version of self-deception, I think. Did you have something on this particular?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so go ahead.
Just a comment that how much is it involved into what we believe that is wrong. For example, in Russia, you have 3 or 4 different concepts of truth. Depending on whether the truth is preserving your own inner group, and that's the kind of the ultimate sense of truth. But that the thing that you say you can reveal facts which, if it's preserving your group, and everybody knows that it's not truth, but so that's called pravda. You know, that kind of the public truth.
Okay.
And then there is a public truth that is not actually true, but everybody knows, whether it is to preserve your honor or to preserve your existence. And then there is the fourth level. And the person who's utilizing these 4, so this is a cultural thing, they are aware because there are actually a different Russian word for each of these. So everybody knows, but it is not about doing something wrong because it is actually a cultural thing to utilize those levels, and the Finns are most commonly highly unaware that this is happening, so you kind of learn by living there. But just the fact that, because you in the beginning you were mentioning the concept of wrong, because it's not wrong, it's being clever.
Could you send me something on that the different kinds? I need to read more about that. If you could send me something about so I can learn more about it. I'm woefully ignorant, so
this is just about the Russian culture.
Yeah. No, if you have anything that you could send me, I would think about it. Let's see. You're right that we're going to have to think about different kinds of truth, and we're going to have to think about intentionally distorting the facts as you see them. What facts are we talking about? Facts as understood by your in-group, facts as understood by your society, objective facts. There are lots of different facts, or truths, you could say, put in the language of truths that we could talk about. I was only thinking maybe simplistically about facts or truths that you personally think are facts or truths, regardless of whether your society does or not, what you personally endorse. So I'll give an example along those lines, and then I will come back to your thought too in a second. I have one more thought there. If your society thinks that the earth is round, and yet you grew up, and there is a society like, there's a community like this. If you grew up in the flat earth community today, which raises children to believe that the earth is flat and shields those children so they don't know anything else, any different. And then you ask one of those kids who grows up in that society, what is the shape of the earth? They're aware that the society thinks that the earth is round. They personally believe the earth is flat. They say the earth is flat. They're being honest. In my way of thinking. So whatever the societal truth is doesn't matter. It's what they personally believe the truth is. And whatever the objective truth is doesn't matter. It's whatever they personally believe the truth is. And in this example, they're wrong based upon society, they're wrong based upon the objective truth, and yet they're still honest because they were reporting what they personally believe the truth is. That's how I'm thinking of it. And then let me just finish up. I think to tie this back to self-deception and to your example, I think we need to bring integrity into the picture here. So maybe honesty isn't the right focus for this discussion of these two selves. Maybe integrity is the right place to really go deeper here, because looks like to me like a failure of integrity of an integrated self. This is a splitting of the self into a public persona and a private persona, but then you don't have an integrated whole anymore, and integrity is ultimately about being someone who is wholehearted in what they do, publicly and privately. So I wonder if that might be a helpful place to go to keep the discussion going. So, yeah, okay.
Thanks. So I was actually hoping that you could expand a little bit more on the social aspect of honesty. Because, well, as we be discussing in this example, there might be some cultures where it's a common practice, for example, for people to lie and bribe and plagiarize and cheat on exams and so on. And other cultures where it seems that honesty is very much valued.
Sure.
And there's a lot of trust. Also, so what kind of social practices do you think can cultivate honesty and perhaps also in the religious context, there's some religious groups and you outline practices which seem to contribute to honesty, but then there's also practices which might lead to dishonesty, like we've seen some of these abuse scandals where people do these big cover-ups, and then there's also like groups where people are into bad apologetic arguments, and then they get angry if they are corrected.
Yeah.
So also some situations where at least it's intellectual dishonesty and dishonesty. So
Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah. I'll add one thing to that.
There's too much already. Don't add any more.
So it seems that there are cultural differences. That has to do with what was just Sanna said. So that there are cultural differences with respect to whether it's acceptable to be dishonest towards out-group rather than in-group. So there are cultures like I would say Finland is one of those cultures where honesty across the board is a good thing, but there are traditions and cultures where it's more common to think that okay, you have to be honest to your friends, but if you lie to others or cheat others, it's not too bad.
Right. Yep. So there's just so much. So much there. It's really impossible without taking another hour or so. So let me just say very, very quickly a few things. So it seems like we're having two discussions here. One is an anthropological discussion, and one is a moral discussion. So anthropologically, a number of you are noting, look, cultural differences. In this culture, they do this. In this culture, they do this. And in this culture, they try to value honesty across the board. In this other culture, they honesty only towards in-groups, but don't care as much about it towards out-groups. Anthropologically, in some religious contexts, there's dishonesty towards parishioners or in abuse cases and so forth. I agree entirely about that. Absolutely. This is just empirical, right? The empirical differences across cultures. What do we make of that? I'm a moral philosopher. So what are we going to make of that? we can go in a variety of different directions. We could go in a more relativist direction and say, okay, the right thing to do, or the virtuous thing to do, is going to be indexed to those cultures. So what's right in this culture is different from what's right in this culture. Morality varies from culture to culture. And so Finland, you really value honesty, that's good for you. Picks corrupt country X, you don't value honesty, and that's good for you. Corrupt country X. I don't go in that direction. I'm no more relativist. I'm a moral objectivist. I think there are objective moral. All right, says the empirical guy. Yeah. So I think there's objective moral truths for all human beings. We could talk a long time. That's why it's a really rich set of questions. Where those truths come from? Are they put in place by God? Or they just exist on their own? Like I said, how do we get access to them? Epistemically, how do I grasp those truths? Huge topics. But given that framework, I'm going to say, therefore, look, one culture is doing it better than the other culture. And which one? Well, that depends on my degree of confidence that I can latch on to the objective truth. I might be hesitant and say, I don't know, because I'm not sure, or I don't have a lot of confidence I'm latching onto the objective truth, so I'm not going to make any judgments about which one's better, but I know that one of them is better, because there's an objective truth. Or no, I could say, I've got a fairly good degree of confidence that Finland's doing it better than corrupt country X. Corrupt country X is vicious, Finland is virtuous, or at least that there's differences between the two countries. Finland's doing it better than corrupt country X. So I wanted to come back directly to your question. I want to grant all of your empirical claims, but I want to take the discussion in a moral direction. And I want to say that's where the stuff that interests me is. So now there's a footnote to what we're talking about here. Are there situations in which it's justifiable to be dishonest? So where a culture maybe is dishonest, but for good reason. And I think the answer there is yes, because honesty isn't the only thing that matters. It matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. And there can be cultures, there can be situations, particular situations, where other values come into play that outweigh, objectively, not relativism, objectively outweigh honesty. The paradigm example of this is a particular situation, the Nazi at the door example, where you're hiding the Jewish family in the basement. The Nazis are doing a routine patrol of the neighborhood. They're going door to door. Do you know where Jews are? Do you know where Jews are? You're the homeowner. You've got Jews in the basement that you're hiding. They knock on your door. You open up. They say, do you know where Jews are? You know that if you lie, they're just going to go to the next building. It's just routine patrol. You know that if you tell the truth, there's going to be a lot of harm, probably to you and to the Jewish family. And so in this case, honesty matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. I think it gets outweighed by compassion. Or pick another virtue if you don't think it's compassion. Compassion towards the Jewish family. And so this is not relativism. It's objectively true that the right thing to do in this situation is to lie. But in that case, dishonesty is okay, it's acceptable, but plenty of other cases in which it's not, but some cases in which it is.